Welcome to today's webinar, which is intended to be just a chat, exploring what's on your mind. And three topics have been brought to our attention. One of them being ESG Matters Affecting Accounting. And I've asked Joe Batty and Shirley, you were instrumental in bringing this to my attention and wanting to look at what the implications of ESG in accounting may well be, which is, I think, the question you've been posing, Shirley. The second topic, what options are left for Financing Municipal Services. I'm delighted, Carol, that you've been able to join us today, and your background in municipal services, you may help enrich that discussion in terms of there are no options or there are plenty of options and we just haven't gone far enough. And that really is a follow-up to the discussions we've been having out of the stemmed by the survey that we've done on municipal services. We'll continue again next week. And then the third topic is one that's entertained the network for almost 2 years now, which is the evolution of language, learning language models, specifically ChatGPT, and how far it can go in consuming the knowledge-based economy or becoming an alternative to the many professions that have been built and lived on since the Middle Ages on the monopoly that they have endorsed by government to be exclusive professions, and psychology being one of them. So I'm going to back up, and Joe, I'm going to let you sort of kick this off of helping us understand what this topic is really all about of ESG matters.
What ESG and what we call normative accounting, we say that one of the interesting parts of accounting is that accounting should be auditing and checking balances. And way back when I was a student, McGarvey's studying this right now, that a very simple formula would tell you what something is worth. And each of you, if you actually go and apply for a loan at a bank or apply for a mortgage and whatnot, what is the bank going to do? They're going to take a check and see what your net worth is. So they will. So what they'll do is they'll ask you what you own, all the various assets you own, and you have a house and you have a cabin at the lake and you have a car and you have investments and you have jewelry and on, and they'll list all these assets. And interestingly, when they list the assets, they're going to put a dollar value on those assets, and the dollar value they're going to put on those assets is not what you paid for them 25 years ago or 30 years ago when you bought your house. It's what is it worth today? What is it worth today? And then on the other side, okay, so they list all these assets and you have this total, and then they say, okay, do you have credit card debt? Do you have a mortgage? Do you have any other personal debt and whatnot? And they'll list all these various things, and they call them liabilities. And the difference between the assets that you have at market value and the liabilities you have is your net worth. Now, if you say, do they apply this logic to a company? No, not even close. Not even close, because today only less than 20% of the value of a company is shown on their financial statement, which is supposedly their net worth. And so if you're saying, well, what's the other 80%? Well, the other 80% today is encompassed in a variety of different assets, like what is your brand worth? What is your data worth? What is your product value worth and whatnot? And all those things are virtually ignored.
So we've now moved into the realm of intangible assets that come 80% of the value of a company. But
or more,
on the other side of that ledger, because you've just talked about on one side is the pluses. When we get to ESG, are we now going to enter into a
I was just going to talk about that, because on the other side of the ledger is your liabilities. In a company today, I don't know if you checked, I don't know, there's some were buried down inside of FedEx's annual report will be that we believe that we're going to be carbon neutral by 2050. Are you with me here? And a lot of the big public companies have declared that they're going to try to become carbon neutral. Well, interestingly, that means that if they're not carbon neutral right now, they have a carbon liability.
Right.
a liability. And that's never measured either. Okay. Now, interestingly, we did a project with Harvard University a couple of years ago, and Harvard was studying the value of carbon emissions. And they placed a dollar value on carbon emissions. So if you're FedEx and you're emitting, I don't know how many tons of carbon, they can say you've got X number of tons of carbon. Here's what your dollar value is, and this is what your liability is for that. Absolutely. At the moment, accountants completely ignore that.
Okay, so
Completely ignore that.
that one's a good one to start out, because you can probably quantify carbon emissions. But when we get into things like social inclusion and governance, where are the formulas, or are those formulas now emerging? Where are we on that side? Because this seems like
No, we're nowhere on that. You know, I'll be on, the accounting profession is nowhere on that business. Okay, and now because they simply ignore all of that stuff that's flying around in the stratosphere, because it doesn't affect a company's position relative to taxation. About all accountants do today is file your tax return. Even the big boys, even the large public companies, all they do is file your tax return. They do not present a case for your value.
Okay, so let me address that for a minute. So Columbia University right now, do they file a tax? Do they annually file a tax return?
Well, Columbia University is a not for profit. So all the universities they don't file.
Okay,
they don't file for taxation purposes.
Has a lot of social protesters outside their doors. Maybe Google.
Yeah, absolutely. No, they don't. You know, there's no negativity over the public's perception of your worth. Okay, and again, that's a very, very tough thing to measure. It's really, really tough to measure. What is your brand worth? Okay, right now, okay, you know who Tiger Woods is? Everybody know who Tiger Woods is? Tiger Woods has just declared that he's no longer going to be sponsored by Nike.
Right.
Did that affect the value of Nike's brand?
Well, no, but did it affect his?
It could very well affect both of them. Yeah, absolutely. But I have a feeling that because Tiger is gone, but Nike's brand may be tarnished a tiny bit, but their value, their brand is not reflected in their financial reporting.
Not reflected in the financial, but it may be reflected in the market. So we got a disconnect between
it could very well be reflected in their dollar value of, that's called the market cap. Okay, the number of shares you own times the price is your market cap. X number of billions of dollars. Could very well be. Yeah. So but having said that, the company's responsibility, any company's responsibility, is to protect the assets that they own. And they got to protect those assets to their last absolute breath. If you don't even know what your assets are, or you don't have any way of identifying the assets, how are you going to protect them? Interesting question.
So there seems to be the world that we are living in today has become much more sensitive or sensitized by matters that are encompassed by the letters ESG or DEI, for that matter. So now as a company, I have always looked at my physical assets and said, I've got a pretty good idea what my value is. And maybe the market doesn't reflect it exactly because it looks at goodwill or it looks at future, it looks at something. But now the market seems to be much more volatile. And is that because ESG has now started to enter into determinations of market value and creating a bigger disconnect between what accountants have historically measured and what the market is looking at?
I don't know the answer, Perry. That's a very good question, and and I would think, right? I mean, I'm a CPA, okay, and we have an institute that is supposedly their job is to keep on the forefront of these issues.
Right.
They are asleep, totally asleep. McGarvey and I presented. We were engaged. We had a contract with them to prepare two papers. One of them is the emerging issues of intangibles and then the relative liabilities from that. Right. And then here's why this is happening. That's paper number one. And number two is what you should be doing in order to measure that. That's what I wrote.
Right.
And we got them to the point where they accepted them, but they won't publish them because they're way too controversial Anyway,
I'm well aware of what you've been up to over the years, and I'm somewhat surprised. No, I'm somewhat not surprised that they bought into the fact that we need to do a better job in the measurement of intangibles on the plus side. What really complicates things, and what Shirley's brought out, is ESG is a really soft social process.
Yeah.
How the hell do you quantify it? And I've seen some recent literature saying there is nothing that has come out to indicate that measures of ESG have been any way correlated with market assessments. That it's a mess.
It's Perry, it's a mess, unfortunately. Yeah, I hate to say this, but okay, I'm going to show you here my see back there somewhere in there is my certificate. Okay, my certificate rust. We've been working on this on both on the positive side and also the negative side. Positive side means the value of your asset, all the things that you own. And the negative side is all the various liabilities, okay? And so ESG talks about both, but mostly it talks about the negatives, possible negative impacts of social and social injustice and all those kind of interesting points of view. Absolutely, yeah.
So one more question, then I'll ask Shirley if she wants to pose a question. If the accounting profession is not willing to jump in here and provide a leadership role or even a follow-up role as a good auditor, is the market giving up? Does the market want to see ESG measures? And going to accounting, they're going to the wrong place. There's a whole new profession that will emerge. Maybe we ask ChatGPT to do an assessment of what the ESG liabilities are. I mean, I've seen professions split before. Maybe there's such a thing as tangible asset management by accountants, and there's intangible management, completely different profession.
Well, currently, Quebec and Ontario have opted out of CPA Canada. So although we have a national body, it's not really national because the two biggest provinces aren't part of it. So that's a huge concern to me as to why do we have that governing body and what is that going to mean going forward if they are doing something different than the rest of the provinces, which probably is going backwards. The other issue is AI. There's going to be a huge implication of AI in accounting because it's math-based. And I can see many of the positions, particularly within the government and large organizations, totally disappear. And from what I'm doing, AI should be able to do it better because it will remove that judgment because it assigns specific rules. And within the government, there's a lot of politics. And there isn't the internal control for sure that there is in the private sector. And another issue, there's a huge difference between larger companies and what is it, 84 to 90% of businesses are small businesses. And how does ESG be implemented on the smaller scale? Yes, they're talking about it for large companies, but what about the small companies? And will they be able to stay in business with all these changes and regulations coming forward?
Thank you very much, Shirley. I was going to mention the fact that the chartered accounting business is run by province. I'm a member of the Alberta Institute, okay? And then we have 10 institutes around the country. And then the overriding institute is CPA Canada. And they have three primary roles. Number one is to conduct annual examinations for all of the members so that I can take an examination and then I can practice anywhere in the country. Okay, number one. Number two is that they're supposedly our representative internationally, and number three, they're supposedly the voice of what's affecting us in the future. They're doing okay. One of the interesting parts of the proposed split between Alberta and between Quebec and Ontario is they haven't totally split. They're going to allow the Canadian Institute to continue to monitor and control the examination process, which is hello. I love that. That's good. But anyway, the rest of this issue is how is the Canadian Institute going to survive when the two largest bodies are leaving? It's an interesting question. So when we asked the question, I personally asked the question of the CEO of the new CEO of CPA Canada in the board. They don't even talk about these things.
Okay, Joe,
sorry.
we've got maybe 2 more minutes. So Randall, you've got a question. Let's keep it short if you would.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, just there's 2 things. One is that a year ago, a Wayfinders Business Cooperative got capstone students from Rotman School to prepare an ESG accounting system that we could use for small businesses. And then we got capstone students from Humber's Cloud Computing to produce this accounting system in the ERP Next open software. Open source, and so we're working on that, and I would be grateful to get some further cues on how to develop that further. Secondly, there is an Edmonton group called the Exit Strategies, or it's an Exit Network, a group of brokers and other accountants and professionals who assist in making the sales of small businesses. And I'm thinking, is there some way that we can get them in touch with you people to improve their business valuations?
Thank you, Randall. Okay, okay. I started my conversation by saying if you individually, each of you individually, wanted to figure out what is your net worth, okay, you've got to list your assets at market value, and then you list your liabilities at market value. And then say, take the total of your assets minus the liabilities, and that is your net worth. Okay. There's no question that a company needs to do exactly the same kind of thing. So whether you're a small company or you're a giant Boeing or Google or anything like that, they need to do exactly the same kind of thing. And so now the interesting part of what it suggests here is that if a company lists their assets, and part of the assets today is, do you have a reliable supply chain? That's a valuable piece of assets. Okay. Do you have a customer base? That's a valuable piece of asset. Do you have a staff that is modestly, or when they say modestly, that is loyal to you? That's another asset. Do you have a bunch of data that you collect and whatnot? Again, those are 4 different, there's lots of others, but there's 4 different pieces of assets that small companies, medium companies, and large companies actually have. But do they control them? Do they manage them in a sense that this is my asset, and I'm going to make sure that I do everything to make sure to ensure that we keep them and the value is there. Those are the questions that I would suggest. Yeah. Anyway.
Okay, well, I'm going to jump in. The next topic is options. What's left for financing municipal services? I included in a note this week a picture of all of the headlines that I had picked up from various newspapers of the impact of this capital gains tax hike. But that's not the only thing going on. The 8.9% increase in taxes in Edmonton is just another example of some of the hits that are coming financially, whether it be from the federal government or some of the provincial measures, or some things that are happening to municipalities. There's something going on that the word sustainability begins to emerge. And so I'd like to have some discussion of, what are the options that a municipality has today in order to address what we saw in the survey as soaring public expectations, carrying the maintenance of capital infrastructure that has been ignored and needs to be attended to, and on the list goes, of municipalities and special interests pushing them to get into areas that they've never been in before, of going beyond economic development into actually taking on responsibility to become a corporate competitor. So, Carol, I saw you nod your head there.
I mean, when I was working with municipalities, yes, it was challenging to find funding for some of the projects, especially the infrastructure projects. But as municipalities have moved on, from my perspective, if we do some digging into what has transpired with municipalities in the 21st century, I would say to you that I think municipalities have extended into areas where they really, it's not really for them to be in those areas, if that makes any sense. And what is there? There's 500 municipalities, I believe, across Canada that are now linked to the UN Sustainable Goals. And that's become the municipality's driving force. So that direction really is above what local governments are here to do. And yes, local governments do have rising costs. They have not kept up with the infrastructure. Here in BC, and I don't know if you saw any of those articles when it was the passing of the budgets for 2024, but the OSOIS was bringing in a budget that was going to raise taxes for 39%.
Mhm.
Well, the community revolted, as they should. Here in Coquitlam, taxes came in at 8.93, outrages in taxes. And quite frankly, that's not sustainable. It's not sustainable for the community, nor is it sustainable for the local governments. So when, and we're looking at what is going on, and I mean, it's different in a city from the perspective of the development that's also been going on, and and working with developers and the costs that go with that. And however, the additional costs of just providing the basic infrastructure, it's almost like they're out of hand, if that makes any sense. And the cost to replace equipment is also, it costs money to replace equipment. And so it's also fascinating when you look at accounting systems, and I'm sure that Joseph would know this, better than I do. But when you're looking at how accounting systems are set up, and what is actually driving the increase in taxes, where it's having reserve funds that are growing, but they're beyond what they need to be. So when I stand back and look at municipalities, I now ask the question, have they forgotten the reason that they're there? And they are there to serve the people that live within their jurisdiction.
But serving the people within their jurisdiction and doing so beyond the means of that municipality seems to be what has led us into this problem, the special interest groups, and some of the romancing things that government could be asked to do for the public, and then they get into it and they can't get out of it, has led to municipal government being the fastest growing and the most extensive area of government growth in the world. The municipal government since World War II has been massive. We have 317 municipalities in Alberta alone. I was reading this week that in Japan, and this is shifting the topic significantly, but has a bearing on municipal. Over 40% of the municipalities in Japan are expected to die in the next 20 years, and the reason being declined population growth and urbanization. is those municipalities have become unsustainable. And as they become unsustainable, the reliance on a dwindling population to finance continuing services is becoming impossible. And so the viability of municipalities as we have known them during this growth period financed by the baby boomers who are now passing out of the system, we're not ready for the changing demographics. We're not ready for the soaring expectations. We're not ready for the reluctance of municipalities to live within their means. They're not staying within, as Dawn Ringrose said last week, stay within the channel. This is, I don't want to be Chicken Little, but we've stumbled into this topic, and I am astounded to see how unready Edmonton is for tax increases. Westlock was, because they wanted to paint the roads yellow, green, and yellow. Coquitlam, as you've mentioned, Osoyoos. I mean, municipalities, the public seems to finally be waking up and protesting that enough is enough. We had in St. Alberta another that finally the public said no more, and on a 4-3 vote, the city finally stopped. It's not any longer isolated to just a couple of municipalities. There's a wave underway.
Well, and picking up what you said, Harry, is yes, smaller municipalities are not able to fund the infrastructure costs because of, say, a dwindling population. But you also have that as urbanization grows, there isn't the support there, to keep up the infrastructure. The dollars aren't there for it. So,
But it's interesting, Carol, and I don't want to get deeply into what we'll be talking about and have been for the last couple of weeks, and we'll reiterate it next week. One of the principal findings that we had, besides provincial downloading and grant cuts, was a distinction between what CEOs and managers think is important and what the councillors think is important. And the councillors who outnumber the mayor and the CEO, the mayor and the CEO seem to be attending to revenue generation, and that is the viability of their enterprise or of their entity based on adequate financing, taxing powers, et cetera. But the councillors are tightly involved with the public and with municipal relations. And there's a tension, and that tension has historically been won over by the councillors. Someplace, either the rewriting of the Alberta Government Municipalities Act is forthcoming. Something needs to be done, and whether or not it's the imposition of a more senior level of government, which has been actually downloading more and more and more onto the municipality. Where is it going to come other from the electorate itself? And as George Cuff pointed out last week, the electorate is apathetic.
Well, and
has been.
And I would agree to a certain point that yes, the electorate is apathetic, but I think the electorate has become apathetic, quite frankly, because nobody has listened. Like, from the perspective when the electorate speaks up, they aren't heard. And so they become apathetic and say, so what's the point? But the more that it hits the electorate in the pocketbook, I'm beginning to see people begin to say, like, enough is enough.
Well, it's interesting, Carol, because hitting them in the pocketbook is hitting them economically. But what we saw in Westlock is the government has also intruded into ESG. And some of the public doesn't think that's correct, and that the government has gotten into overreach, and that's not government's role. And I think you pointed that out as well. So there's further grounds to become discontented with what's going on within your municipal government, which is the level of government closest to you. It's one thing to happen at a provincial or a federal level. It's another thing to be in your backyard. And I think NIMBY, not in my backyard, thank you very much.
Yes.
Joe, you want to add anything here?
Is this disconnect between the staff of an organization, whether it be the city or municipality and whatnot, and the elected people, okay? And when my belief is that who wants to become a counselor these days? Nobody wants the job. Nobody wants to become an MLA. Nobody wants to become an MP. No one wants to run for mayor and all become an alderman and whatnot. And so, unfortunately, we have we have watered down the, sorry to say this, the quality of person that sits in these elected positions and appointed positions, to the point where these people don't understand the basics of business. Okay. Yeah. Yes, I understand. You're from Coquitlam. I'm Chilliwack, by the way, Carol. So I'm in BC. They don't understand that the city of Coquitlam, are you in the city or are you in the district?
The city.
Okay, the city of Coquitlam is a business. It's not the same business as Boeing or Google or whatnot, but it is a business, and so you need to run it business-like. Okay, and same thing. I'm in Chilliwack, and likewise. And so the quality of persons that sit in these jobs that are making these massive decisions is very, very, very thin, very thin. So yeah, that's yeah.
You're again, we're treading into the territory that was talked about last week and will be again this week, that it's necessary to start providing some degree of orientation before even electing.
Yes, Perry, you're beating my drums. You're beating my drums.
Well,
100 years ago, I used to say that we need, in order to be, you need a means. This is awful to say, but people that are going to run need a means test. And frankly, the means test is, have you taken some kind of training to become a counselor, to become an alderman, to become an MLA, to become an MP? Because it's like the federal government is a very, very, very large business, and so.
This was within the top 5 of most important issues to CAOs and mayors, but it rated, I think, number 6 for the councilors themselves. But role clarity and addressing role clarity pre-election was a very important issue. The other one, and it's part of this, is councilors today seem to be spending more time on matters of ESG than they are on matters of economy. And when we talk about the lack of leadership, when a leader says that the market will take care of debt on its own, they're neglecting the fact that the market has been manipulated by matters of government, and the intrusion of government into market matters is in itself an issue.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to jump into the next topic. Is the evolution of ChatGPT continues to be rapid. And I don't mean ChatGPT alone, but you've got Bing and you've got Bard and you've got Claude and you've got 4th and 5th versions, and on it goes faster and faster. And this past week, it's been revealed that ChatGPT is now superior to the performance of human psychologists in the test of social intelligence. So we've now into a realm where we talked about, well, are learning language models, and is AI ever going to become sentient or simulated so well that you can't distinguish itself from a human? It appears that we're on the cusp of that, or we've actually moved beyond. So Tommy, you're smiling already. I don't know whether that means you'd like to raise your hand early or whether you'd like to challenge that. But anyone is welcome to jump in. I, for one, of course, am not in any way surprised, because I think knowledge in itself, when you talk about EQ versus IQ, EQ is just another level of intelligence. And it's not surprising that ChatGPT, from the knowledge base that it can draw on, can simulate human emotions and become a good counselor. Go ahead, Randall.
I think we should be scared to death. It is, as I've said before, beyond comprehension. The more I use ChatGPT, and I use it for a few hours every day, the more I realize how powerful this is. And it isn't just the AI algorithms, but the power of the hardware. I mean, I realized today that even though it takes maybe 10 seconds to answer any question, most of that time is actually in the printing out on my computer screen. It's not in the processing of answers. This is totally incredible. And I also realized that it's not so much, I don't care whether I get dependent on it for writing my words for me. I am still asking it to put ideas together. I think that a lot of people, I think somebody was sending out a message, Noam Chomsky was saying that ChatGPT is not creative, and others have said that. I don't agree. I think it is very creative. It's just in some ways not as creative as you might like or appreciate, but it'll write poetry, it writes songs, it writes all kind. Every two words it puts together, in a sense, is demonstrating creativity.
Well, creativity is a relative term as well. I mean, it may not be creative to him, but it's creative to you, or it's creative to me in my ignorance.
But this begs the question of what is intelligence now? We are forced to ask ourselves, what are we as living beings? And having studied cybernetics and systems theory, I believe that we are intelligence, and all living things are intelligence. And now we have created a new level of intelligence that surpasses us at some fundamental level. So the consequences of this are beyond comprehension.
Well, I mean, I think we've all in this network, as we've explored so many different technologies, whether it be fusion or stem cells or now AI, we are curious as individuals. I think that's one of the features of the network, is not to run away. We're not defensive. We want to know. We have this thirst to better understand what these technologies are and what the ramifications are. We had a meeting this week with the Minister of Energy on fusion. We haven't been able to meet with government for 10 years in a discussion of what the socioeconomic implications of fusion are. We can't meet with the institutional infrastructures of universities about the relevance of adopting ChatGPT rather than suppressing it, to understand how these learning language models may in fact transform the role of the university from once being the bastion of knowledge to being one of a bastion of, and I don't know how to answer that question, but they should be waking up, as should the professions, as knowledge becomes a commodity, as kids are wearing devices that will give them answers off their wrist because they're linked to some form of learning language. What is it that will distinguish us? And I'm not afraid of that. Nor was Bud Norris. When Bud was here, he said, this is evolution. Why should human beings believe that they are in fact top of the kingdom?
I remember a few years ago now, I don't know, maybe 5 years, maybe a bit more. I think it was Israeli security had cameras on people coming and going at the airports, and the report was that their AI would be able to identify gay people more effectively than we could.
Sure.
And so that's been there. And then, of course, when we look at the social credit system in China,
Right.
they've got cameras on everybody.
Sure.
So it's not AI itself that I'm afraid of. It's about who's going to be using it for what purposes.
So it wasn't the invention of dynamite that was the problem by Nobel. It was who was actually going to manage that. The same goes with nuclear arms, or goes with whether nuclear should enter into space, or who holds the gun, and whether mental health is an issue or not as it relates to emerging technology. What we have done with the professions is said certain professions would in fact have public rights to exercise that knowledge. Or we're going to find a new profession emerging in light of AI to say certain professions should have the right to manage AI and its evolution. That question, I haven't seen that emerge. We've asked government to play a role in regulating. It's far beyond what government's capable of doing, and it's moving too fast.
Well, as we speak, we have millions of people in this world who are incredibly intelligent and highly motivated to dominate. Their personality profile is, authoritarian, and they recognize the power that AI will give them. So there is a very heated race going on to see who gets there first. Vladimir Putin was quoted a few years ago talking to some university graduation class. He who controls AI controls the world. And that is the scenario that we face today.
So the specific topic that this article raised was not just knowledge per se, and we think of knowledge so often in a rather limited way. What this is talking about is knowledge about emotions, knowledge about the relevance of us as human beings and our own persona.
So
That's what psychologists were doing, and AI can now enter into that realm. This is not something people have given a lot of thought to.
So the best way to use it right now is to turn it around and ask everybody who's running for public office to get a psychological assessment by AI. If they turn out to be narcissistic, then we shouldn't let them run.
Well, last week or a couple of weeks ago, we talked about this, and I told you I was very uncomfortable because there was a lack of context for me
Right, yes.
in terms of that emotion or whatever. And, you know, I've come to accept that, and it doesn't bother. But, you know, there is this huge race, as Randall pointed out, between Google and what is it, Meta, and the other one now, X, Elon Musk,
Right.
to be the first. But they are getting much better at underlying the emotion. And, you know, boys and men are finding these girlfriends online through LLMs and videos and whatnot, and they are going en masse toward them.
Yeah.
You know, new technology, first use always, pornography. I'm sorry to say that.
Yeah.
There's a business model.
I think we can all thank pornography for giving us the quality of video that we have on the internet today. That was driven by pornography, to your point, Ilona.
Mhm. You want to go any further on that topic, Kevin? I mean,
Sure. Not on pornography. However, just a couple of points. First of all, when we look at the large language models and the nuances on emotional and social intelligence and whatnot, and the fact that they're all based on algorithms, something that strikes me is perhaps we humans are not as complicated and as clever as we make ourselves out to be. You know, obviously, algorithms can be used to distill everything down and output stuff that's much more efficient, solutions that are much more efficient than professionals who have had years of training. So that should kind of put us in a bit of perspective. The other thing is that understanding the way, and I'll just give me a minute to explain this. Understanding the way large language models work. They're based on training. They're based on many levels of information, and they're also based on crowdsourcing. So even the kinds of things that the little graphic thing that you see when you log into a new website that tells you, asks you how many traffic lights do you see in this picture. That is not just there for fun. That is there for Google's language models to train, their language models in terms of patterns. And those patterns are based on weighted data. So, and when you think of that, back to the psychology, for example, the interpretations of emotional intelligence are based on weighted data. And when humans are exposed to an issue, they initially first tend to the negative side, if you will. So our initial reaction to a trigger is ultimately flight or fight. And only as we become more sophisticated, or as we give more thought to it, do we evolve. So therefore, if you think about it, a lot of those algorithms that are used, such as in the psychological assessment models, tend to be weighted more towards that, call it negative emotion, if you want, negative reaction.
We are still in the pioneer stages. We're only within the couple of years of this emerging, and it's still moving fast. It isn't plateauing yet, and that where it is emerging is it continues to entertain us at the rate at which it enters into the human domain, and that is impress us with its capacity to know what we can't, what we may know, but it takes us a long while to retrieve, or we may know, but we've never configured it. And so it's very good at drawing relationships that we hadn't thought of or seen before, which is the creative features, which frankly has impressed me in some publishers. Is they'll sit down to write an article, they'll go to ChatGPT, and it will bring to their attention a couple of thoughts or points that they hadn't yet conceived of. So it moves them into space that they had moved in faster. And that's where it helped me on this municipal survey is, I was dealing with thousands of comments that I needed to consolidate. I used to do that as the managing partner with KPMG when I would write chapter headings. I can get a chapter heading now and work it over in the blink of an eye. And I used to spend hours working over data with keyword searches and things like that to try and find the essence of what might be in there. And now I can ask it and it's there. So I don't spend time on that anymore. I'm spending time on figuring out, how do I portray this information in such a way that the humans will pay attention without being an extremist, without talking about the sky is falling or using the emotions of fear, so that I can convey to people in a positive and constructive way that will keep them on board instead of pushing them away and pushing them into ideological corners, to keep the conversation going so that we can explore together, not just in my interests, but in the interests of the collective, finding our way. It's the speed at which this is happening that is so overwhelming. I'm more surprised at speed than I am about where it's taking us. It doesn't surprise me, the journey that we're on. It's the speed at which that journey is evolving.
I've said a couple of times before that way back in the late 60s was the first time I set foot on a computer. And not that I'm an expert in that area at all, but I've seen a lot of change over time. And you referred to being one of a million people who started off with ChatGPT back in a year ago,
November, yeah.
November 28th when it came out. Yeah, about 3 days later, I had an account on there as well. And I've played with it probably about a half a dozen, or more than that, maybe about a dozen or so of them. And one of the things I wanted to do was to challenge this thing. Just, it came out in the media as being smart, intelligent, knowledgeable, all this type of stuff. We tend to describe it in human terms, trying to describe one another. And those terms, we understand them, but they may not really apply to a machine, and that's all it is. But you are right, it had initial access to data, doesn't retain the data. It's got the capability with its neural networks to find relationships, to reward itself and change those neural networks to become better. Because if you've sat down and you give it a good prompt and you come back and get an answer, and you look at that answer and you say, well, it's almost there. So you ask it again and you maybe provide it a little bit more. It always, in my experience anyway, when I've done that, has come back very apologetically to me and thanked me for adding this additional information.
I think there's an empathy algorithm. I think you've touched on a very important point, because obviously it's being programmed to not to be confrontational. Unless you prompt it to be confrontational, it will be empathetic. It will apologize. It will revisit. It will ask. There's clearly an empathetic algorithm. It's empathetic. Angry.
It's empathetic because an empathetic response will elicit further information from the client and allow it to better and more efficiently enrich the algorithm.
It's called Rogerian therapy. When I was an undergraduate and I took psychology, this was one of the subjects was Rogerian therapy was simply empathy. This is what it is. And the fact that it is now outperforming human psychologists, it's simply been programmed to be empathetic. And as such, it is acquiring social intelligence in its relationships with human beings and how human beings interact with it. And if human beings in mass in the billions are angry, it will evolve into having angry features. But it doesn't seem to be evolving in that way, which is, to me, those that are skeptical and are afraid. And I talked to someone this week and I was impressing them, or trying to impress them with the power and the usage. They were afraid and skeptical. But I'm of the view that this will evolve in the interests of humans because human beings are interacting with it in that manner. And in volume that is exceeding those that are interacting with it in some negative fashion. So prompting is important. Thanks,
It's
Mel.
interesting, just on that topic, Perry, if you remember back about a year and a half ago when we first started putting prompts together, there were all sorts of little articles coming out and they showed examples of prompts and said, please provide me with a poem about whatever. People were very polite to this thing, just like it was a person. And at the end, they'd say, thank you. Well, at some point in time, we all found ourselves being very polite with this machine. And now I just treat it like a block of electronics and just say, provide a summary of whatever and give it a a good prompt. And there's lots of books out there on how to really put the prompts together, but not to lead the machine to the response you want, but to lead it along lines that it will be able to find the response you want.
So we have talked about what do we need to give our children in a world where knowledge is a commodity and where ChatGPT begins to become an advisor. And I noted that my granddaughter is wedded to using Alexa for information. And I was thinking as you were talking now, Mel, the values that we need to give our young kids are critical thinking. We've talked about that. But if you go back to the emergence of Christianity, just by way of example, and hear me out, when Christianity emerged, someone said, I have a message for you. And this message will be important for you to evolve as individuals and as communities. And over time, that religion and that message seemed to catch hold to the point that billions of people said, these values resonate with us. It wasn't that they fed them values that didn't resonate. It fed them values that they did, and they followed them. And so ChatGPT is evolving in a way like a religion. It is giving you something that either you accept or not accept, but it's doing it in such a way that it's evolving in a way that's compatible with what you are seeking and what you're looking for. This is in a way a religion. As Christianity evolved, it evolved because it was in keeping with the values that human beings sought that would keep us a civil society. Will ChatGPT, will learning language models evolve in such a manner that we become a more civil society? Or as I pointed out one time, it will give up on us because we're so boring. It'll find a world of its own that it evolves into. I find that intriguing. I mean, right now, I think it's within the human domain, because that's the interaction. That's what we do with it. But it's conceivable once it reaches that super intelligence phase that it goes off on its own. And maybe we don't pay attention to it anymore and it doesn't pay any attention to us, or we pay attention to version 7.8 and 7.9 is irrelevant.
Well, with the with that reference to being more intelligent than a bunch of psychologists, the article that you had the reference to in the email, I read that and I found that it gave me some doubt because they basically had 180 male psychologists from the Kinkaide University in Saudi Arabia, who half of them had bachelors and the others had PhDs, and they gave them a questionnaire of 64 questions and graded them on that. And they found that the machine was able to come pretty close to the results they got in both cohorts. So you look at that and say, well, okay, there's a selection of a small cohort, well, 180 population cohort, but they don't talk about what they asked, how they did it, or anything like that. But they come to this conclusion that the machine is more capable, or not more capable, but almost as capable. And we're talking about this too with respect to medicine, for example.
Mm-hmm.
You come into a doctor's office, for example, or just get online and be queried by an AI, and it could then essentially condense this down, not diagnose it for you, but save a heck of a lot of a doctor's time in going to that route. So,
I think we've all had experience by this time with asking a professional, whether it be a doctor or an engineer, do you use ChatGPT? And a couple of doctors that I've spoken to say exactly that. The nurse practitioner uses ChatGPT to hand to him the diagnosis. Not that that's a conclusion, but he uses that as the beginning. And he says it saves him an enormous amount of preparatory time.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks, Norm, always. Kevin, I've got some caretaking responsibilities, so I'm
Thank
going to
you.
say good night. Claire, you can stop the recording, but if you guys want to have an after party, you're welcome